Thank you for the introduction.
Yeah.
My name Marcel Tibaleka, already Ambassador of Uganda in Bali. Mr. Rui Duarte Barros,
Yeah.
former President of the Guinea-Bissau.
Prime Minister.
The Honorable Han, former Prime Minister of Armenia, is here.
He just is around here.
And Mr. Mark Dan Ferry, who is not with us, I'm told, as a representative. Distinguished delegates, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to address this congregation on the important topic of sustainable business, tourism, responsible investments. Before I proceed, I extend sincere apologies from the Honorable Minister of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, who should have presented this keynote address. It is now my great honor and privilege to deliver the same. In this platform, I hope we can share and contribute to this discussion basing on the experience of my country, Uganda, as well as global tourism industry that is invested in encouraging achieving sustainable business responsible investment. The sustainable challenge. Sustainability is a global responsibility as we all are affected by the same issues. Because of this, global action has to be taken in order to ensure the development of sustainable business and responsible investment globally. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, have been developed to guide international sustainable development. All international environment protocols, including the Paris Agreement, aim to promote sustainability globally by addressing the threat of climate change. Sustainability means meeting our present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In addition to natural resources, we also need social and economic resources. Sustainability is not just environmentalism. We also find concern for social equity and economic development. Sustainable development changes regionally Africa. Africa is constantly changing and developing. There is increased democracy and transparency, as well as better governance and developing economies. However, despite these developments, the region still faces serious sustainable development challenges. One of these challenges is the poverty that is rampant in African countries, with 48 of them having a number of people living on less than 1.90 US dollar a day. With a considerable population living in poverty, it is difficult for such countries to successfully carry out sustainable development, as there will be hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education and other basic services, social discrimination and exclusion, as well as lack of participation in decision making. Africa is a continent endowed with abundant renewable and non-renewable natural resources, and there has been sustained demand for Africa natural resources, which include oil and tourism. But the continent continues to suffer from effective institutional capacity to manage these resources sustainably. Some of these countries have been unable to carry out sustainable development due to poor governance and policies, while others are due to financial constraints. Achieving success in a program as huge as the Sustainable Development Goals requires a massive amount of financial investment that some African countries cannot afford. Sustainable development challenges for Uganda now. Uganda was one of the first countries to develop in 2015, 2016, 2019, 2020 National Development Plan in line with SDGs. However, there are still some challenges that we as a country face that hinder sustainable development, especially in regard to our tourism industry. One of these challenges are the climatic change in Uganda that negatively affect the sector. Such changes in a temperature are likely to have significant implications for water resources, food security, natural resources management, human health, settlements, and infrastructure, which make sustainable development in Uganda and in the tourism sector challenging. Impact of tourism development. According to UNWTO, the object of sustainable tourism is to retain the economic and social advantage of tourism while also reducing or mitigating any undesirable impacts on natural, historic, cultural, social environment. This can be done by balancing the needs of tourists with those of the destination in order to maintain a long period of time. The tourism industry greatly relies on the environment more than any other industry in the economy, which results in the direct negative and positive impacts to the ecosystem globally, regionally, and locally. Positive impacts of tourism. Generally, if tourism is developed sustainably, it greatly contributes to the foreign exchange earnings in the country, which can be used to improve people's standards of living. In Uganda, tourism is driving force for GDP, growth, employment, foreign exchange earnings. Tourism is already contributing over 6 trillion to GDP and bringing in over 1.4 billion US dollar in foreign exchange. In Uganda, an increase of 100,000 tourists increases GDP growth rate by 1%. One of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is gender equality. In many developing nations, the number of women is still low in the labor force. Yet, the tourism industry, with the low employment entry barriers, is a big contributor to employment. employment, with 1 in every 11 jobs as a result of women and other vulnerable categories acquire social and economic sustainability. Goal 8 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is decent work and economic growth. In this case, the tourism industry is a large source of employment and income for many developing nations, as well as benefiting the local communities, especially those in areas where tourism business are operated. In Uganda, for example, tourism has positively impacted on the communities around protected areas. This is because whenever a tourist pays park entry fees to the national park, 20% of the proceeds are plowed back to the communities to support community projects. In some instances, some percentage of the revenue is used to sponsor social community projects like schools, health centers, safe water, provision and reduction of human-wildlife conflicts. Through revenue sharing, the communities have been mobilized to form groups that engage in artifacts that are sold to tourists for dance groups to offer cultural entertainment to tourists, leading to increase of household incomes and poverty reduction, at the same time increasing on the country's foreign exchange. For example, the government has supported communities around protected areas by planting chili, tea, Mauritius hedges, and keeping bees as a way of deterring stray animals, especially elephants, from crossing to communities, hence enhancing their welfare. This has significantly reduced human-wildlife conflicts in these protected areas. Another example are the communities around Queen Elizabeth National Park. Incidentally, any of you has been to Uganda, to the national park? Any? That elephants collect elephant dung, make books, paper, and briquettes out of it. The paper is usually appealing to tourist facilities, especially the guest book, and can also be processed further to produce paper bags, where tourists can carry their items, gift cards, postcards, calendars, and books for the use in the local and regional schools. The dung is readily available in the national park as well as gardens where elephants often feed. The residual after paper production are used to produce briquettes for hotel and domestic energy use. This has potential to reduce tree cutting for charcoal burning. Socially, tourism encourages the preservation of traditional customs, handcrafts, and festival that might otherwise have been allowed to wane, and creates civic pride. The improvement of infrastructure and new leisure amenities that result from tourism also benefit the local community. All these interventions have helped drastically to reduce poverty levels amongst our communities, hence ensuring sustainable development to coexist of the communities and wildlife in protected areas. Of course, we have negative impacts of tourism. The negative impacts of tourism can be categorized into social, economic, and environmental. Tourism poses a threat to a regional natural and cultural resources, such as water supply, beaches, coral reefs, and heritage sites through overuse. Tourism has a negative impact on resources and energy, as most tourism facilities use large amounts of water and electricity, which negatively impact on consumption and production goal. For example, only less than 3% of the world's water is drinkable. So, the world must ensure that water is used sustainably. Tourism facilities do also pollute water faster than nature can recycle and purify water in rivers and lakes, which is damaging to ecosystems. Dumping of waste in water hinders the development of tourism as sustainable business or industry, as waters are contaminated of no use. Tourism activities can push up local property prices and the cost of goods and services, which increase the cost of living. Money generated from tourism does not always benefit the local community, as some of it leaks out to huge international companies such as hotel chains. Visitor behavior can have a detrimental effect on the quality of life of the host community, e.g., demonstration effect. Tourism also brings about crowding, congestion, where human-wildlife conflicts exist around protected areas. Tourism can even infringe on human rights, with locals being displaced for their land to make a way for the new hotel and tourist attraction investments. In addition to tourism sector is generally contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, especially through the transport of tourists, which causes climate change. Environmental pollution caused by gases, dust, noise is now common due to the rise of industrial revolution the world over. Sustainable businesses and responsible investment in Uganda. Uganda has prioritized the development of ecotourism, which is characterized by contributing to conservation of biodiversity, sustaining the well-being of local people, including the interpretation, learning experience, involving responsible action on the part of tourists and the tourism industry, is delivered primarily to small groups by small-scale business and requires lowest possible consumption of non-renewable resources and stresses local participation, ownership, and business opportunities. Ecotourism therefore aspires to achieve sustainable development results. This means that the planning and development of the tourism infrastructure, its subsequent operation, and also its marketing to focus on environmental, social, cultural, and economic sustainability criteria. Uganda has created a favorable climate for the development of business activities and the private sector. Both national and international have developed interest in investing near nature reserves and other areas in the country. The development of environmentally friendly facilities and encouragement of greening concept is being done in Uganda, such that forest centers, accommodation establishments, and other facilities have been built using local materials to blend with environment, while natural light solar is encouraged. Environmental practices in development and operations of ecotourism facilities, establishment, and services that are being used involve the use of less intrusive infrastructure materials, use of renewable building materials and technology, and adhering to the carrying capacity of the ecosystem. Carrying out sustainable activities such as gorilla tracking, where regulations are in place to ensure that the gorilla viewing business is managed sustainably. In order to limit negative environment impact in pristine areas, it was necessary to put in place a visitor quota where a limited number of people in a group are allowed to track gorilla, chimpanzee, or undertake nature walk at specific times of the day and keep a distance of specified number of meters from the animals. For fear of infecting animals, no sick visitor is allowed to go tracking the animals, and visitor behavior is regulated. Involvement of most communities in tourism development. Local communities are involved in the planning and management of the recreational development, ensuring that their needs and ideas are incorporated. The communities around the reserves and other natural areas have also benefited from training and extension work, thus appreciating and encouraging conservation at the community level. Harvesting of park forest resources on sustainable basis is also being encouraged. Tourist sites have provided a means of women to sell their handicrafts and foods as supplement to their income. Employment of communities bordering the natural areas and the ecotourism sites have been generated, thereby creating additional income. Employment to communities bordering the natural resources are the ecosystem sites As a result of ecotourism development in Uganda, illegal activities have reduced tremendously, while the community's standard of living have improved. At the same time, wildlife has been conserved. Challenges faced by the tourism industry in Uganda. Climate change, one, climate change. Uganda is invested in sustainable development. However, there are some core challenges that we as a country face in achieving sustainable tourism development, and they include climate change due to the rising global temperatures caused by immense carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere day and night. In 2012, Uganda was ranked as #1 tourist destination by Lonely Planet, the largest travel guidebook publisher in the world. This is because our country has a tropical climate supporting diversity of fauna and flora, snow-capped mountain on the summit of Elgon, Rwenzori, attracting visitors all the year round. But all these natural resources are being threatened by increasing global average temperatures. Uganda has experienced warm to hot conditions with temperatures ranging from 24.50 Celsius to 33.80 Celsius. As a result of climate change, the snow-capped peaks on Mount Rwenzori are slowly beginning to melt, while there is emergency of invasive species in protected areas. This can, in the long term, result in decrease of tourists visiting the destination, thus reducing the income generated from tourism in Uganda and its sustainability. Deforestation. There has been a change in the forest cover between 1990 and 2005 as Uganda lost 26.3% of its forest cover, or around 1,297,000 hectares. This resulted in a 24.7% loss in habitats, causing loss of biodiversity. Uganda has come 86 known species of amphibians, 19% of Africa's richest, 1,063 birds species, 50% of Africa's richness, mammals making 39% of Africa's richest, and 142 species, reptiles, 14% of Africa's richest. Of all these, 1.1% are endemic, meaning they exist in no other country, while 3.1% are threatened. Thus, deforestation is a core challenge of sustainable development on tourism. Poaching. Uganda tourism is dependent on wildlife. Thus, in order to promote sustainable development in tourism, we have to produce our main tourism product. Sustainable development of the tourism industry is threatened by poaching of wildlife and illegal trade of wildlife species. A reduction in wildlife will no doubt result in a decrease in tourism arrivals to our country. Illegal trade in wildlife trophies. This is due to the lucrative illegal trade in ivory. Rampant poaching of wildlife threatens sustainable tourism in Uganda. Way forward: afforestation. There are organizations that have been set up to encourage Ugandans to carry out afforestation rather than deforestation. 2, implementation of international agreements. Uganda is a member of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species, of which fauna and flora, and therefore has put into force. 3, policies, regulations, and guidelines. Uganda has developed policies, regulations, and guidelines to guide and ensure sustainable development of the different sectors, including tourism. Agencies such as the National Environmental Management Authority, NEMA, has been put in place to ensure that all that development projects take the conservation of environment into perspective in order to attain sustainable development. Ban on polythene bags. The government of Uganda has banned the production of polythene bags in order to reduce on pollution and preserve the environment. In conclusion, tourism has the force to propel economies to shift from being peasant-based to middle and prosperous economies if we planned. This calls for efforts to ensuring that the development made in form of investment don't have negative effects onto the social well-being of communities as well as the environment where these developments are made. It is therefore a concern of everyone world over to ensure that tourism development is done in a sustainable way as to enjoy the fruits today and in the future. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before we begin for the question, we have the next speaker from Burundi. We talked about tourism also. But Ambassador, I want to thank you again for your debate about tourism in Uganda and how tourism sustainable in Uganda is done. You talk about the climate change and the sustainability of the resources in Uganda and these sustainable development goals, the impact of tourism development, positive impact and the negative impact of the tourism, and the impact also for the community, local community tourism in Uganda. And at last, about the challenges, and Uganda is signatory of several conventions, international conventions, and the member also of the many international organizations in charge of environment and the biodiversity in the world. So I want to thank you again. Please, if you have some question for the Ambassador, please. Thank you. Yes? Yeah.
Hello, Your Excellency. My name is Marcel. I'm from the USA. During your speech, you mentioned that tourism has a negative effect on the culture of the areas that have high tourism. And how is that possible? Obviously, tourism has been good for strengthening cultural balance between people. How can it be negative?
Well, negative in that sense, what they meant being negative, say for example, the local communities may be based somewhere. Then all of a sudden they are told to migrate, go away, because they want to put up an infrastructure for the tourists. And naturally, when they are told, you go away, sometimes they don't find where to go the next. Say, where do we go? So that starts beginning now creating conflicts. Say, is it because the tourists are coming here that we are being displaced? So that, I think that's the negative, what they say. The local community, when they say, they are told, please, can you vacate? Say, we go where? Because people are coming to see this and that, and then we as natives or whatever are being told to move. No. That's to me, the way I look at it and understand it. Yeah.
Yes, more questions?
Yeah, please.
Hi, Joseph, California, United States. Thank you. My question is, and also as you mentioned, Prime Minister, about climate change being of importance. Also in your introduction, you spoke Africa is rich in two things, oil and tourism. And so my question is, not only as we're looking to battle climate change, how is Uganda going to scale back on fossil fuel extraction, in whatever way it's doing so, or if that's even a plan? And then also, how sand mining, what that would be doing for the environment.
I will start with sand mining because that is the current issue now back home. But I would say for a long time, even I also used that sand, which was they used to say the lake sand. And then the other is actually basic sand they can have around. It's of recent that the issue has come up. In the first place, the explanation from the environment and the ministry responsible, they say if we continue sand mining, in the end we may have no fish species. So that is still something which is still debatable there, and we hope a solution is going to be found. The oil resources, we have not started yet, but in 2020, in December, we hope to start. So we are not yet there to experience that the oil has this and that to us as far as climate is concerned. Of course, people are talking of renewable energies instead of the fossil oil. So, and have been informed that now, currently here, diesel vehicles have been banned. So, when they ban them, where do they go? Because my personal experience is that when they are banned from here, they will shift on the continent. Instead of saying, no, let's phase out everything, they should not go anywhere, but they find their way there. And even when you place an order and you want to procure a car, say, is it for use here? You say, no, it's on continent. There are certain things they don't put there. This CO2 emission, they don't put, say, okay, you go. And yet we are trying to fight the climate change. So sometimes these things are a bit hard to understand.
Thank you, Marcel. Yes? One question?
You said polythenes have been banned in
So-
Uganda. So what is the alternative?
The alternative, of course, now the paper bag, because that one is friendly to the environment, paper bag. But of course, it takes a bit of time. Polythene banning some couple of years ago, but it's still there. So the alternative is is paper bag because it's friendly to the environment.
Please, from United States.
Yeah, I have one more question about the oil. So do you think that when you begin drilling oil in 2020, despite all of the negatives about it harming the environment, do you think it's going to have any impact on, say, the ivory trade or any kind of illegal function? If there's like an alternative to make money, is it going to help?
The two are totally different.
I know, so
Yeah? Because the oil, that's a government business. Now, whereas poaching is for the locals. If they get the opportunity to find an elephant with his tusks and they know that is already man. And the rhino horn, I think the Far East is the best something they can have. Well, the oil, and not really the real local people are the subject. They are agents of some people who are not within there, who normally say, can you get this? We do this and that. But currently, back home in Uganda, it's not a real threat, this poaching on animals. It is from our neighboring areas, like, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So even if you involve the locals in like the oil industry, or have them help with have them like employed in any large companies that come to extract the oil, would it have any?
Well, the oil sector, of course, to get the locals, they must have the skills required. There's no way they can get on board. And of course, the government has gone ahead to train ahead of the production. They have trained a number of people who currently have no jobs until 2020, when they can be taken on board.